I should have known that the minute I laughed in that man's face, life was getting ready to humble me in a way no boardroom ever had. I told him, half joking and half insulting him, "If you get this car running tonight, I might as well marry you, because apparently miracles are the only thing this town has left." And the worst part is, he did not laugh back. He just looked at me through the rain like he had heard rich people say stupid things before. And somehow, that quiet look made me feel smaller than any insult could have. My name is Vivian Hart, and back then people called me the woman who could buy her way out of anything. Failed contracts, hostile investors, broken partnerships, even family problems when they got inconvenient. I ran Hartwell Provisions out of downtown Boston. We supplied grocery chains across 6 states. And if you asked the business magazines, I was disciplined, decisive, ruthless when necessary, which is a polite way of saying I had forgotten how to speak to people like they were people. That October evening, I was driving alone to northern Pennsylvania after a supplier visit, trying to make it back for a 7:30 flight, because the next morning I had a private meeting in Boston that could decide whether my company swallowed a competitor or got swallowed first. The rain was coming down so hard the wipers looked embarrassed to even be trying, and my pearl gray Mercedes, which had never once betrayed me in front of anyone important, began coughing like an old man at the worst possible moment. First the temperature gauge climbed, then the engine light blinked, then there was a hard metallic shudder under the hood, and before I could even curse properly, the car rolled to a dead stop on the shoulder of Route 19, 3 miles outside a little town called Bellwether, which was the kind of place my assistant would have described as charming if she were trying to make bad news sound cute. Steam curled out from beneath the hood, rain soaked my coat, my phone had 1 bar, and all I could think was, of course this happens, when I cannot afford for anything human to happen. I tried calling roadside assistance, then my assistant, then a private driver, then the one board member who still owed me a favor, and every answer was either voicemail, no service, or some useless estimate that involved the words tomorrow afternoon. A few hundred yards ahead, through the curtain of rain, I saw a faded Medi sign swinging from a wooden post. Mercer and Sonato, honest work, fair hands, and I remember thinking, well, that sounds exactly like the kind of place that takes checks only and has a dog named Rusty. I grabbed my purse, stepped into ankle-deep water and shoes that cost more than some people's rent, and marched toward that little garage, like I was about to sue the weather itself. The building looked tired, not dirty exactly, just tired. One roll-up door half open, yellow lights spilling across the wet concrete, the smell of motor oil and coffee drifting into the rain, and somewhere inside, a radio was playing old country music so softly it felt like the building was humming to itself. "Hello," I called, trying not to sound desperate and failing. "Is anybody actually working here?" A man slid out from under an old green pickup truck, wiped his hands on a rag and sat up slowly like he had decided a long time ago that rushing did not improve anything. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-30s, black, with close-cut hair, grease on one cheek, and eyes that were calm in a way I found immediately irritating. "You having car trouble, ma'am?" he asked. "Ma'am?" That word alone made me feel 100 years old and somehow even more annoyed. "My car died down the road," I said. "I have a critical meeting tomorrow morning and I need it fixed tonight." He stood, reached for a worn canvas jacket and said, "Let me take a look." No performance, no panic, no kissing a ring, just a man picking up a toolbox because there was work to do. His name was Caleb Mercer, though I did not bother asking at first, because at that point in my life, if someone could not affect my stock price, I had a bad habit of treating their name like optional information. He followed me back into the storm, lifted the hood, and went quiet. I watched him work under the rain, flashlight between his teeth, fingers moving through hoses and metal like he was reading a language I had never cared to learn. I kept checking my phone, pacing, muttering about flights and board votes and people who were paid very well to prevent situations exactly like this. After 10 minutes, he closed the hood gently, which annoyed me too because nothing about that moment felt gentle. "Radiator is cracked," he said. "Water pump is done too, and I do not love what I am seeing around the belt. This is not a roadside patch." I stared at him. "English, please." He wiped rain from his brow. "It means I can fix it right, but not tonight. I would need parts from Harrisburg, maybe Scranton if Harrisburg does not have them. 2 days if we are lucky." 2 days, I said, and I actually laughed because the alternative was screaming. "Mister," I looked toward his embroidered shirt. Mercer, I do not have 2 days. Name your price." He looked at me then, not offended, not impressed. "Hearts do not move faster because you offer me more money." That was when I said the line, the one that would later haunt me and somehow bless me too. If you fix this engine tonight, I will marry you, I said with the sharp little smile I had used on bankers, lawyers, men who confused confidence with permission. Because clearly, if you can do the impossible, you deserve a prize. Caleb just looked at me. Rain ran down the side of his face, his coveralls were dark with water, and he said, I am not looking for a prize, ma'am. I am trying to keep you from getting yourself killed on a wet highway. That should have stopped me. It did not. I was embarrassed, cold, late, and too proud to admit I was scared. So I did what people like me do when fear shows up. I dressed it up as authority. Listen, I said, stepping closer. I run a company with 800 employees. I have a vote tomorrow morning, and if I am not there, a man who has been waiting years to push me out will get exactly what he wants. I am not asking you to perform magic. I am asking you to do your job. Something changed in Caleb's face, not anger exactly, more like a door closing. My job, he said, is to fix cars properly, not to risk someone's life because she is used to being obeyed. The rain seemed to get louder. I folded my arms, which was ridiculous because I was shivering so hard my jaw hurt. Do you know who I am? He gave me the faintest smile, and I hated that smile because it had pity in it. I know you are standing in the rain with a broken car. That is the only title that matters to the engine. I wish I could tell you I had some graceful comeback. That is the only title that matters to the engine. I wish I could tell you I had some graceful comeback. I did not. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish in a designer coat, and then said the kind of thing people only say when they have already lost the argument. You small-town people always act like principals. Pay the bills. Caleb's eyes hardened for the first time. Sometimes they do, he said. Sometimes they are the only reason you can sleep at night. Before I could answer, a tiny voice came from inside the garage. Daddy, is the mad lady still here? Now, I had been insulted in shareholder meetings, in magazine profiles, once by a French chef who told me I ate like someone negotiating with food, but nothing landed like being called the mad lady by a child in unicorn pajamas. A little girl stood at the edge of the garage light, maybe 5 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Her curls were tied unevenly with a purple ribbon, and she was looking at me with the open curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to pretend. Caleb turned immediately, and the steel in him melted so fast it almost embarrassed me to witness it. Rosie, baby, I told you to stay inside where it is warm. She ignored him and looked at my car. Is that lady's car sick? Caleb sighed. Something like that. Can you fix it? I can, she picked. I can, sighed. Something like that. Can you fix it? I can, he said. But not tonight. Rosie turned to me, very serious. My daddy can fix anything, but he says rushing makes bolts grumpy. I blinked, and despite myself, I almost smiled. Almost smolt. Well, I said, your daddy is making me miss a very important meeting. Rosie frowned like she was considering whether to forgive me for being stupid. But if the car is sick and he makes it go too soon, it might get more sick. That is what happened when I went back to school too fast after my fever. I did not have an answer for that either, which was becoming an unpleasant theme. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder. Go on in, sweetheart. I will be there in a second. Rosie looked at my soaked coat, my ruined shoes, my shaking hands, and then back at her father. Daddy, she is wet. Caleb glanced at me, and for the first time that night his expression softened. Not enough to let me win, just enough to remind me I was still human. There is a boarding house 2 blocks over, he said. Mrs. Alvarez keeps rooms above the bakery. I can call her and tell her you are coming. I wanted to refuse because accepting help from him felt like losing twice, but my phone had died, my car was dead, and my pride, while enormous, was not waterproof. Fine, I said. Make the call. Caleb did not move right away. You can wait inside while I do. It is warmer. I looked past him into the garage. There was an old couch with a plaid blanket over it, a workbench covered in tools, a little table with 2 mismatched mugs, and drawings taped to a cabinet. Bright crayon suns and lopsided hearts, and one picture that seemed to show a car flying through the sky. It was nothing like my life. My world was glass offices, silent elevators, hotel rooms where the towels were folded like no one had ever touched them. This place was worn and cluttered and alive. I stepped inside. Rosie ran ahead and dragged a small wooden chair toward me, the legs scraping across the concrete. You can sit here, she said. It is not wobbly if you do not lean too much. Good to know, I said, and then because there was something about her face that made sarcasm feel cheap, I added, thank you. Caleb went to the phone near the office door and I sat there dripping onto the floor like a very expensive umbrella. Rosie climbed onto the couch and tucked the rabbit arm. What is your name? She asked. Vivian. That is fancy, is it? She nodded. Mine is Rosie, because Mama said I looked pink when I was born, but Daddy says I looked like a potato. Caleb called from the office without turning around, a very beautiful potato. Rosie giggled, and that sound did something strange to the room. It made the rain feel less hostile. It made the garage feel warmer. It made me aware with an uncomfortable little ache that I could not remember the last time someone had laughed around me without wanting something. Caleb finished the call and came back. Mrs. Alvarez has a room. I will walk you over when the rain eases. You do not need to walk me anywhere, I said too quickly. I can manage. Rosie tilted her head. You are scared of getting more wet. I looked at Caleb. Does she always tilted her head? You were scared of getting more wet? I looked at Caleb. Does she always do that? Tell the truth? He asked. Rosie hopped down and disappeared into a small back room, then returned carrying a faded towel and, with great ceremony, handed it to me. It had cartoon ducks on it. I stared at it like it was a legal document. For your hair, she said, you look like a sad mermaid. That one got me. I laughed before I could stop myself. A short, rusty sound that surprised all three of us. Caleb looked at me with one eyebrow raised, and I suddenly felt defensive, as if laughter were a weakness he had caught me committing. Rosie beamed. See, not mad anymore. Do not get ahead of yourself, I said, but softer. Then came the hot chocolate. Rosie insisted, and Caleb protested that I probably did not drink anything that came from a chipped saucepan, which was the first mildly rude thing he had said all night, and annoyingly, it was funny because he was probably right. But he made it anyway, heating milk on a little burner, stirring cocoa powder with the care of a chemist, dropping in marshmallows from a bag Rosie had apparently been guarding like treasure. She carried the mug to me with both hands, walking so slowly I feared none of us would survive the suspense. Here, she said. Daddy makes it when the rain is too loud. I took the mug. It was too sweet. The marshmallows were half melted. It was served in a cup that said World's Okayest Fisherman, and it was the best thing I had tasted in months, maybe years. That is good, I admitted. Rosie nodded, deeply satisfied. Daddy says sugar does not solve problems, but it can make them sit down for a minute. Caleb turned away, but I saw him smile. I looked around the garage again, slower this time. There were photographs tucked into the frame of a dusty mirror. Caleb holding Rosie at what looked like a county fair, Rosie on his shoulders under a 4th of July sky, the two of them sitting beside a lake with paper plates in their laps, smiling like people who had not needed an audience to prove they were happy. On the far end of the workbench sat a small vase with plastic daisies, a child's backpack, and a stack of overdue-looking envelopes held down by a wrench. It was not romantic poverty. It was hard, real, tired. But there was love in it, so much love it seemed to have seeped into the walls. I thought about my penthouse back in Boston, spotless and professionally decorated, a place where no one left crumbs because no one ever stayed long enough to eat anything messy. I thought about the long dining table I used twice a year, the guest room prepared for guests who never came, the quiet that greeted me every night like a loyal dog I never wanted. Rosie climbed beside me and pointed at one of the photos. That was the fair. Daddy won me a goldfish, but it died because I loved it too much. You loved it too much, I asked. I fed it pancakes. Caleb coughed like he was hiding a laugh. She means one pancake. It was a very small fish, Rosie said solemnly. I smiled into my mug, and for a moment I forgot the meeting, the board, the rival waiting to carve up my seat before it was cold. Then my dead phone buzzed once from some final scrap of battery, lighting up with a preview from my assistant. Urgent. Graham calling emergency vote. Need you in Boston now. The warmth vanished. Graham Vale, my chief operating officer, my polished, patient snake in an Italian suit, a man who had spent 5 years smiling at my left hand while reaching for the knife with his right. He believed Hartwell Provision should abandon the small regional farms that had built us and shift to cheaper overseas contracts, faster margins, cleaner spreadsheets, uglier consequences. I blocked him for years. Tomorrow's vote was supposed to decide the issue. If I missed it, he would present my absence as instability, emotional burnout, female volatility dressed up in corporate language, and the board, terrified of losing money, might just let him. Caleb noticed my face. Bad news. I stood too quickly, nearly spilling the cocoa. I need a phone, now. He pointed toward the office. Landline is there. I rushed in, dialed my assistant from memory, and got through on the 3rd try. The line crackled. Mara, it is me. Get me a car, a plane, a helicopter, I do not care. Vivian, she said, voice tight. Graham has been calling board members individually. He is saying you disappeared after the supplier audit. He says you were hiding because the numbers are worse than you claimed. That cold little corporate fear slid down my spine. Tell them I am delayed by a mechanical issue. I did. He said that is convenient. Of course he did. Mara lowered her voice. Viv, he has Hollis and DeWitt leaning his way. If you are not in that room by 9, he might force an interim authority vote. I closed my eyes. Behind me, through the office glass, I saw Caleb kneel to tuck Rosie's blanket around her shoulders. She had curled up on the couch, still holding her rabbit, trusting the world because he was in it. I felt a flash of envy so sharp I almost missed what Mara said next. Also, Graham is asking questions about your personal holdings. He thinks you are vulnerable. I laughed once without humor. Graham always thinks people are vulnerable. That is why he does not understand strength. But even as I said it, my eyes stayed on Caleb and Rosie, and I hated that some part of me wondered whether Graham understood my world better than I did. I hung up and walked back into the garage. Caleb was cleaning tools, giving me privacy I had not earned. I need another option, I said. Train station, rental car, private airstrip, anything. Nearest rental office is 40 miles and closed until morning. Train runs at 6:20 if the tracks are not washed out. Bus comes through at 5:15. That would get you to Pittsburgh. Maybe a flight from there. Maybe, I repeated. I do not run a company on maybe. You looked at me. Maybe you do not run life at all. You just keep trying to. That hit too close, so I snapped. You know, for a mechanic, you have a lot of opinions. And for a CEO, he said, you seem real confused about what can be controlled. The room went still to Andu and toed the insult. Then Rosie, half asleep on the couch, murmured, Daddy, be nice to the sad mermaid. Caleb sighed. Sorry. I looked at him, then at her, and despite everything, I laughed again. This one hurt a little. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because I could feel something in me cracking. Something old and polished and very expensive. I sat back down. The clock above the office door ticked toward midnight. The rain softened. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat across from me at the little table, leaving enough distance to be respectful, close enough that the silence felt shared. You always talk to people like that, he asked. Like what? Like they are in your way. I almost told him to mind his business, then realized I was sitting in his garage drinking his cocoa, wrapped in his duck towel, while his daughter slept 10 feet away. My business had become embarrassingly public. I talk like that when people are wasting time, I said. He nodded. And are people always wasting time? Or do they just move at a speed that reminds you they are not machines? I looked down at the mug. No one had ever said it like that. My father used to say softness was a tax successful people could not afford. Caleb leaned back. Your father sounds tired. I should have defended him. Instead, I said, he was. Then, because the night had already taken too much from me, I kept going. My parents built a packaging company from nothing. They worked constantly. When I was little, I thought if I got perfect grades, perfect internships, perfect promotions, they would finally look up long enough to see me. Caleb did not interrupt. That made it worse and easier. I became very good at being impressive, I said. Not very good at being known. He stirred his coffee slowly. There is a difference. I know that now, I said, though I was not sure I had known it 5 minutes earlier. Rosie shifted in her sleep and whispered something about pancakes and fish. Caleb's face changed again, that open fatherly tenderness that made the whole garage feel sacred. Her mother left when Rosie was 2, he said quietly. Not because I asked, not because he owed me anything, but because sometimes one honest thing invites another. Said this town was too small, said I was too content with too little. Maybe she was right about the first part, not the second. I looked at the photos. Does Rosie remember her? A little. Mostly she remembers wanting to. There was no self-pity in his voice, and somehow that made it heavier. I waited for him to complain, blame, harden, do what people in my world did when life disappointed them. He only said, some people leave because they cannot see value unless it shines. Some of us stay because we learn to see it in what is already warm. I did not trust myself to answer. The rain outside slowed to a whisper. For the first time all night, I was not thinking about Graham. I was thinking about the little girl asleep on the couch, the man who had every reason to be bitter and had chosen instead to make cocoa, and the humiliating possibility that I, with all my money and influence and tailored certainty, might be the poorest person in that room. Around 1 a.m, Caleb walked me to Mrs. Alvarez's boarding house under a big black umbrella with a bent handle. The town smelled like wet leaves and bread from the bakery downstairs. The streets were empty except for puddles catching the streetlights. And I remember thinking Bellwether looked like a place people came back to, not escaped from. At the door, I turned to him. Thank you, I said, and the words felt strange because I had said thank you a million times in my life, but usually as punctuation, not gratitude. Caleb nodded. Bus leaves at 5:15. I will knock at 4:30 if you want. You do not have to do that. I know. He turned to leave. Caleb, I said. He looked back. I am sorry for what I said earlier. His face softened just a little. Which part? I gave him a tired look. Do not push your luck. He smiled then, a real one, and walked away into the rain. I barely slept. He smiled then, a real one, and walked away into the rain. I barely slept. The room above the bakery was small, with flowered wallpaper and a radiator that hissed like it was gossiping. And I lay there staring at the ceiling while my whole life seemed to rearrange itself without permission. At 4:30, there was a knock. Caleb stood outside with coffee in a paper cup and Rosie's rabbit tucked under one arm. She insisted you borrow him for luck, he said. I stared at the rabbit. Does he have a name? Chairman Flop? Naturally. I took the coffee and against every instinct I had spent years sharpening, I hugged that ridiculous stuffed rabbit to my coat as we walked toward the bus stop. The sky was still dark, the town still sleeping. Caleb carried my overnight bag and neither of us spoke much. At the corner, beside a closed diner with a pie sign in the window, Rosie appeared in the passenger seat of Caleb's old pickup, wrapped in a blanket, hair wild, eyes barely open. She rolled down the window. Miss Vivian, if the mean-meeting people are mean, you tell them my daddy said rushing makes bolts grumpy. I smiled, and there it was again, that ache. I will. And give Chairman Flop back, she added. He is important, I promise. The bus headlights appeared down the road, glowing through the mist. I turned to Caleb. I should say something clever here, but I am too tired. You looked at me with that calm that no longer irritated me as much as it should have. Then say something true. So I did. I said, I do not know why meeting you scares me more than losing my company. Caleb did not answer right away. Then he said, maybe because a company can be rebuilt, a life has to be faced. The bus hissed to a stop. I climbed aboard with coffee in one hand and a stuffed rabbit in the other, looking like the least intimidating CEO in North America. As the bus pulled away, I watched Caleb and Rosie grow smaller through the rain-streaked window, and for one foolish second, I wanted to get off. But the old life was waiting, and old lives do not let go politely. By the time I reached Boston, my phone was alive again and punishing me for its absence. 37 messages from Mara, 9 from board members, 1 from Graham Vale, short and venomous. I hope you're prepared to explain your priorities. I looked at that message for a long time, then glanced down at Chairman Flop sticking out of my bag, one floppy ear bent over my contract folder. For the first time in years, I was not entirely sure Graham and I even spoke the same language. I walked into the Hartwell boardroom at 9:26, late, damp, exhausted, coffee-stained, and carrying the faint smell of motor oil. Graham was already standing at the head of the table, silver-haired, polished, smiling like a man delivering flowers to a funeral he had arranged. Vivian, he said, turning slowly as every board member looked at me. How generous of you to join us. And that was when I realized the storm on Route 19 had only been the beginning. I walked into that boardroom with wet hair, tired eyes, and a stuffed rabbit hiding in my bag like evidence of a crime I had not yet figured out how to explain. Graham Vale stood at the head of the table with both hands resting on the polished mahogany, looking so calm you would have thought he had spent the morning rescuing orphans instead of carving my reputation into bite-sized pieces. Around him sat 11 board members, some avoiding my eyes, some watching me with that cold little curiosity people get when they think power is changing hands and they want to be seen standing near the winner. Mara, my assistant, stood near the sidewall with a tablet clutched to her chest, pale and furious, and when our eyes met, she gave me the smallest shake of her head, the kind that said, "This is worse than we thought." Graham smiled wider. "Vivian," he said, "I was just explaining to the board that leadership requires consistency, visibility, and judgment, especially during a period of strategic risk." Strategic risk was Graham's favorite phrase for anything he wanted to steal. I set my bag down slowly, took off my raincoat, and said, "Funny, I thought leadership required honesty, but please, do continue." A few chairs shifted. Graham's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. "I see the night has left you emotional." "No," I said. "It left me awake." Big difference. Hollis Byrne, our oldest board member, cleared his throat, a man who had made his fortune buying companies right before closing their small-town plants and then telling newspapers it was simply market gravity. "Vivian, we have been trying to reach you since dawn. Your unexplained absence has created concern." "My car broke down on Route 19, I said. "I had 1 bar of service, then none. Mara had updates. I handled what I could from where I was." Graham gave a soft laugh. "From where you were, yes, a roadside garage in Bellwether, if I understand correctly." He said bellwether like it was something stuck to his shoe. I looked at him. That is correct. And during this little delay, he continued, supplier confidence shook. 2 regional calls went unanswered, and our pre-market numbers dipped. He clicked a remote and a chart appeared on the screen behind him. Red lines sloping downward with dramatic timing. The room inhaled. It was good theater. Graham had always been good at theater, mostly because he believed business was nothing but theater with lawyers. I glanced at the chart and almost laughed. Graham, those numbers reflect speculation from the rumor you started at 6:11 this morning, not my absence. His jaw tightened. Be careful. I am being careful, I said. That is why I am naming it accurately. DeWitt, who chaired our finance committee, leaned forward. Vivian, regardless of how rumors began, the market is reacting. Investors dislike uncertainty. Then perhaps, I said, they should dislike men who manufacture it. That landed harder than I expected. Mara looked down to hide a smile. Graham's face sharpened. This is exactly the problem, Vivian. You are turning a serious governance matter into a personal fight. No, Graham, I said. You turned it personal when you called board members before sunrise and suggested I was unstable because my car broke down. You turned it personal when you used one mechanical failure to question 20 years of work. You turned it personal when you tried to push through overseas sourcing while I was stranded, hoping no one would ask why the contract language changed last night. The room went very still. Graham blinked once. I had not planned to say that last part yet. It just came out, pulled from some place in me that was tired of playing polite chess with a man who had been moving poison pieces. Hollis frowned. What contract language? Graham recovered quickly. A routine revision, nothing material. Mara stepped away from the wall. It was material. Every head turned to her. She swallowed hard, then looked at me for permission. I nodded. Mara walked to the table and tapped her tablet, sending a document to the boardroom screen. Version history, she said. At 11:48 last night, the proposed Southline procurement agreement was edited to remove the regional farm protection clause and replace it with discretionary vendor flexibility. Graham requested the change to legal after Ms. Hart was unreachable. DeWitt leaned toward the screen. That clause was the reason we approved preliminary talks. Graham lifted a hand. The language was inefficient and overly sentimental. There, it was. Not illegal, not untrue, not even hidden anymore. Sentimental. That was the word men like Graham used for communities, livelihoods, promises, anything that could not be trimmed into a quarterly gain. I felt something inside me go quiet, not weak quiet, not frightened quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a person stops asking for permission. I looked at the board. That clause protects 87 regional farms that have supplied us for years. It keeps our prices stable, our quality consistent, and our word intact. Removing it would allow Graham to shift contracts to cheaper offshore suppliers within 1 quarter, close 3 distribution partnerships, and dress the whole thing up as modernization. Graham snapped. Modernization is not a crime. Neither is loyalty, I said. He laughed then, louder than he meant to. Loyalty does not keep a company alive, Vivian. Margins do. I stared at him, and for a second, I was back in that little garage watching Caleb pull a blanket over Rosie's shoulders. Seeing a man with unpaid envelopes on his workbench still refused to risk my safety for extra cash. Caleb had less than anyone in that room, yet somehow he understood value better than all of us sitting around mahogany pretending numbers were the same thing as truth. I turned to the board. Let me tell you what happened last night. Graham rolled his eyes. Please spare us the travel diary. No, I said. You're going to hear this. My car broke down in a town most of you would drive through without slowing down. A mechanic there told me the repair could not be rushed. I offered him more money. He refused. I pushed harder. He still refused. Not because he was lazy, not because he did not understand urgency, but because doing the job wrong could have put me in danger. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I went on. His little girl was there, 5 years old. She watched me behave like someone who thought status was a substitute for manners, and she asked her father why I was so angry. Imagine that, I said, my voice lower now. A child in a garage understood something this board seems determined to forget. Speed is not the same thing as wisdom, and profit is not the same thing as value. Graham scoffed. This is absurd. A broken radiator has nothing to do with corporate strategy. It has everything to do with it, I said. Because last night a man with grease on his hands had the courage to tell me no when no was the honest answer. And this morning I walk into my own boardroom and find a room full of people afraid to say no to a proposal that would gut our promises because the spreadsheet looks convenient. Alice looked away first. That told me more than any vote could have. Graham leaned in, voice low and dangerous. You're romanticizing poverty to distract from failure. I turned to him fully. No, Graham. I am recognizing dignity because you keep mistaking it for weakness. His face went red under the expensive calm. You missed the meeting, you damaged confidence, you exposed this company to risk, and now you are standing here preaching morality because some mechanic gave you cocoa in a garage. Hot chocolate, I said. It was hot chocolate, and honestly, it had more integrity than your entire proposal. Someone coughed. It might have been a laugh. Graham heard it too, and that tiny crack in his control made him cruel. So that is it, he said, voice rising. Our CEO spends one night with a small-town mechanic and comes back ready to rewrite corporate policy like a church bulletin. Tell us, Vivian, did he also teach you how to run a company or only how to feel sorry for people who cannot compete? I felt the room flinch, not for me, for him, because cruelty, when it gets too naked, embarrasses even people who are prepared to benefit from it. I thought of Caleb's face when rich people looked through him. I thought of Rosie calling me a sad mermaid and handing me that duck towel like it was royal silk. I thought of Graham seeing people like them as background costs, soft targets, inefficient attachments to land that could be cheaper somewhere else. My hands stopped shaking. The anger had gone clean. I reached into my bag and pulled out Chairman Flop. Yes, the stuffed rabbit. Yes, in front of the board of Hartwell Provisions. Mara's eyes nearly fell out of her head. Graham stared like I'd placed a live animal on the table. This belongs to that mechanic's daughter, I said. She gave it to me for luck before I got on a bus at dawn to come fight a man who thinks kindness is a liability. Graham laughed, but no one joined him. I placed the rabbit beside my folder. Laugh if you want. I would have laughed yesterday too, but that little girl did not ask what I was worth. She did not ask what title I had. She saw a wet, frightened woman and offered comfort. And her father, the man you just mocked, has more leadership in his hands than you have shown in this room all morning. Graham's voice turned icy. You are done. I looked at him. Not yet. Then I clicked my own remote. Mara had prepared the file overnight from documents we had been collecting quietly for months, though neither of us expected to use it like this. The screen changed. Vendor payments, consulting fees, shell companies tied to Southline Logistics. Graham's initials on approval memos he had claimed he never saw. The room froze. My voice sounded strange to me, calm, almost gentle. Graham, since we are discussing judgment, perhaps you would like to explain why your brother-in-law's consulting firm received $340,000 from Southline 2 weeks before you recommended them as our primary replacement supplier. Graham went pale. That is a mischaracterization. DeWitt stood up so fast his chair bumped the wall. Is this verified? Mara answered, yes. Legal has copies. We held them because Ms. Hart wanted a full internal review before accusing an officer publicly. Graham looked at me with pure hatred then. Not polished rivalry, not ambition, but hatred. You had no right. I had every right, I said. But I was waiting for the right moment. Then you tried to use my absence to force a vote. He turned to the board, panic beginning to tear the seams of his suit. This is retaliation. She disappears, returns unstable, waves a child's toy around, and now produces a conspiracy because she knows she has lost authority. Hollis said quietly, sit down, Graham. Graham spun toward him. Do not tell me to sit down. And there it was, the crack widening. The man who had spent years speaking in silk finally showed the barbed wire underneath. You people are unbelievable, he said, pointing around the table. She has dragged this company into sentiment and stagnation, and you still look at her like she is some moral compass. I am the only one in this room willing to make the hard decisions. I am the one who understands where the market is going. Small farms, community partnerships, employee training, all of it is dead weight. Dead weight, I repeated. You looked at me. Yes, dead weight. Farmers who cannot scale, towns that cannot compete, workers who think loyalty entitles them to security, customers who cry about values and still buy whatever is cheapest. That is reality, Vivian. You are just too vain to admit your pretty little conscience is bad business. No one spoke. The room did not need me to answer right away. Graham had finally done what men like him always do when cornered. He told the truth, because he thought truth and ugliness were the same thing. I picked up the remote and turned off the screen. Thank you, Graham, I said softly, for clarifying the choice. He stared at me, breathing hard. I turned to the board. Here is the choice. We can become what Graham wants. Leaner, colder, easier to sell, harder to trust. We can abandon suppliers who built with us before our logo meant anything, cut communities loose, call it efficiency, and spend the next decade buying back public trust with advertising campaigns about family values we no longer practice. Or we can accept that a company is not just its margins, it is the people who grow for us, pack for us, drive for us, stock us, buy from us, and forgive us when we make mistakes because they believe we are still trying to be decent. DeWitt rubbed his forehead. Vivian, values are important, but we cannot ignore numbers. I smiled tiredly. I am not asking you to ignore numbers. I am asking you to stop worshiping the easiest ones. I opened another file. 3-year projections, I said. Regional supplier stability, reduced recall risk, brand retention data, consumer trust studies, logistics resilience. I had this prepared for tomorrow's full vote, but since Graham kindly moved the battlefield, we can discuss it now. Mara sent the packet to every tablet. The mood changed in increments, like a storm moving off a town. Board members began scrolling. Hollis adjusted his glasses. DeWitt leaned closer. Janice Powell, who had been silent all morning, finally spoke. This local investment model, she said, it actually improves resilience in 2 of our weakest corridors. Yes, I said, because communities are not charity cases. They are infrastructure with faces. Graham muttered, that is ridiculous. Janice ignored him, and the cost. Front-loaded, I said. The return is slower than Graham's plan, but steadier, cleaner, and less exposed to labor disruption, import volatility, and reputation damage. Also, unlike Graham's plan, it does not include undisclosed family payments. Graham slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Hollis stood. Graham, you will leave the room while we review the conflict materials. Graham turned on him, eyes wild. You cannot remove me from a meeting I called. DeWitt's voice was flat. Watch us. Security was not dramatic. It never is in real life. 2 men in navy jackets appeared at the door, and Graham looked at each of us as if memorizing names for revenge. When his eyes landed on me, he smiled. Not the polished smile, not the boardroom smile. Something meaner and more intimate. You think you won because you gave them a speech, he said. But they will still choose money in the end. They always do. Maybe, I said. But at least now they know what your money costs. He stepped close enough that security shifted. You will regret defending people who would never survive 1 week in your world. I thought of Caleb standing in the rain, refusing 5 times his fee. I thought of Rosie giving me luck because she believed luck could be shared. Maybe they would not survive in my world, I said. Maybe that is the problem with my world. Graham's face twisted, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy, final sound. The silence afterward was not victory. Not yet. It was the silence after a gunshot when everyone is still deciding what kind of damage has been done. Hollis sat slowly. Vivian, the conflict allegations will need investigation. Agreed, I said. Graham is suspended pending review. DeWitt nodded, obviously. Janice looked at the rabbit on the table, then at me. In the sourcing vote, I took a long breath. That is why I came back. Not to save my chair, to save the part of this company that is still worth sitting in it for. The sentence surprised even me. Yesterday, I would have said it was too sentimental. That morning, it felt like the only thing in the room that did not stink of fear. The discussion went on for 3 hours. Nobody clapped. Nobody made a movie speech. Real boardrooms do not work that way. People asked hard questions. Some were fair. Some were cowardly dressed up as caution. Hollis worried about margins. DeWitt worried about investor pressure. Janice worried about implementation. I answered what I could and admitted what I could not guarantee, which felt more frightening than any lie I had ever told with confidence. At one point, Hollis asked, what exactly changed for you in Bellwether? I looked at Chairman Flop, then out the window where Boston glittered in gray daylight, all steel and ambition. I met people who did not treat care as weakness, I said, and I realized I have spent years rewarding people who do. That answer did not satisfy everyone, but it reached a few. I could see it, not conversion exactly. Recognition. Every person in that room had once been loved by someone who did not care about their title. Every person in that room had once known a neighbor, a parent, a teacher, a town, a hand extended with no invoice attached. The corporate world trains people to bury those memories under forecasts and performance language, but buried is not dead. By mid-afternoon, the board postponed the full sourcing vote, opened a formal investigation into Graham's conflict of interest, and approved a 90-day review of my regional investment model. It was not the sweeping victory people like to imagine. It was messier, slower, and more believable. But Graham was out of the room. The contract was frozen, and for the first time in months, the company felt like it had a chance to choose its soul before selling it. When everyone left, I stayed behind. Mara came to the table, picked up Chairman Flop, and turned him over in her hands. "So," she said, "this is new." I gave her a look. "Not a word," she smiled. "I am saying several words internally." "I know." She sat beside me. "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question that I almost lied out of habit. Instead, "I have no idea." That answer scared me, but it also felt clean. Mara's face softened. "You scared them today." "Good, not like that," she said. "You scared them because you stopped sounding like you needed them to approve of you." I looked at the empty chair where Graham had stood. I thought approval was the same thing as safety. "It is not." "No," she said. "It is usually just a prettier cage." We sat there for a while, two women in a glass tower, both exhausted, both pretending less than usual. Then Mara slid my phone across the table. Someone called the main line asking if the sad mermaid made it to her meeting. My throat tightened before I could stop it. "Rosie." Mara grinned, apparently. "She said to tell you Chairman Flop does not like elevators and needs snacks." I laughed and covered my face because the laugh turned dangerously close to something else. Mara pretended not to notice. "I called the garage from the boardroom phone because my cell was nearly dead again, and because some part of me liked the old-fashioned absurdity of it." Caleb answered on the third ring. "Mercer Auto." "It is Vivian." A pause. Then, "Well, now, how did the mean meeting people behave?" "Worse than your daughter expected," I said, "but better than they might have." "You okay?" That question again, this time coming through a crackling line from a man who had known me less than 24 hours and still somehow asked it like he had the right to care. I looked around the empty boardroom, the city beyond the glass, the rabbit on the table, the folder that had nearly ended Graham Vale. "I think I am becoming, okay," I said. "That is not the same thing, but it is something." Caleb was quiet for a second. "Something counts." Rosie grabbed the phone then, breathless and loud. "Miss Vivian, did Chairman Flop help?" "Tremendously," I said. "He intimidated the board." "I knew it." She sounded delighted. "Daddy says your car parts came. He is fixing it right, not fast." "Good," I said, smiling before I realized I was doing it. "Tell him I am learning the difference." Caleb came back on. "I heard that. You were meant to." He chuckled softly, and the sound stayed with me after we hung up. I should have gone home. I should have slept. Instead, I spent the evening in my office reviewing the Midwest Division files, the ones Graham hated most because they were full of small towns, long relationships, plants that needed upgrading, farms that needed support, communities that would never appear glamorous in an annual report. Bellwether was in that region. I had seen the name before 100 times and never paused. Now it looked different, not because the town had changed, because I had. Around midnight, Hollis called. No greeting. Just, "I have been thinking." That sounded dangerous. "About what?" I asked. "Your regional model." I braced myself. He sighed. "My father had a feed store in Iowa. Hartwell was one of his first big accounts before we became what we are. I had not known that." He continued. "I spent most of my career proving I was not sentimental about places like that. Maybe I overcorrected." The old man's voice cracked slightly. "Not known that." He continued. "I spent most of my career proving I was not sentimental about places like that." On the last word, and I looked out over the city lights, stunned by the private grief hiding inside a man I had always thought of as a balance sheet wearing glasses. "What are you saying, Hollis?" "I am saying Graham is poison, and your plan may be less naive than I wanted it to be." That was practically poetry coming from him. "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me yet. You still have to make the numbers work." "I will." "And Vivian, yes, bring the rabbit to the next meeting." I smiled for a long time after he hung up. The next morning, the story leaked. Of course it did. Not the rabbit, thankfully, but Graham's suspension, the frozen sourcing vote, the internal review, all of it. The headlines were cautious at first, then hungry. Hartwell COO under investigation. CEO blocks upward. Regional farm policy sparks fight. Graham's people fed reporters the version that made me sound emotional and erratic. My people, meaning Mara and two exhausted lawyers with excellent coffee tolerance, fed them the version with documents. By noon, customers were commenting online. Some mocked me, some praised me, some asked whether Hartwell had been planning to abandon local farms. Farmers began posting too. Photos of fields, loading docks, families, old Hartwell delivery signs, decades of history Graham would have deleted with one clause. I watched it unfold from my office with a strange mix of fear and wonder. The people Graham called dead weight had names, and once names entered the story, the math changed. At 3, DeWitt walked in without knocking, which normally would have irritated me. He placed a printed report on my desk. Preliminary investor feedback, he said. Mixed but not catastrophic. Some funds are nervous. A few are intrigued by the resilience angle. Consumer sentiment is moving fast. He paused. The farms are making this personal. It is personal, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. That used to be exactly what I worried about with you. And now I am wondering why we spent so long pretending it was not. He left before I could answer. By Friday, Graham's lawyer sent a threatening letter. By Saturday, 3 board members privately admitted they had known he was pushing too hard but had not wanted to confront him. By Sunday, I slept 6 hours for the first time in weeks and woke up with no idea what city I wanted to be in. That was new. I had always known where I was supposed to be. Offices, airports, conferences, hotel suites, anywhere the next decision needed me. But now, when I closed my eyes, I saw Bellwether, wet streets, yellow garage light, Rosie's crooked ribbon, Caleb's hand steady on the hood of my broken car. Monday morning, I flew back to Pennsylvania to retrieve the Mercedes, though that was the excuse, not the reason. I told Mara I needed to inspect regional facilities. She said, "Of course, very professional. Please give my regards to Chairman Flop's family." I ignored her, which was hard because she was enjoying herself too much. Bellwether looked different in daylight. Smaller? Yes, but not small in the way Graham meant. The bakery had blue shutters. The hardware store had pumpkins stacked by the door. A church bell rang somewhere. People nodded at each other on the sidewalk like being seen was normal. I parked the rental outside Mercer and saw an auto, and sat there for a moment, suddenly nervous, which was ridiculous because I had stared down Graham Vale with a stuffed rabbit on a conference table. Yet somehow walking into that garage felt harder. Caleb was under the hood of my Mercedes when I entered. Rosie sat nearby coloring at the little table, tongue poking out in concentration. She saw me first. "Miss Vivian," she launched herself at me so fast I barely had time to set my bag down. I hugged her, awkwardly at first, then less awkwardly, feeling her little arms tighten around my waist like she had decided I belonged to her without consulting anyone. "I brought Chairman Flop back," I said. She gasped. "Did he behave?" "Mostly. He made one board member rethink his childhood." "That sounds like him." Caleb stood, wiping his hands on a rag, and for a second neither of us seemed to remember how normal people greeted each other. "The car is ready," he said finally. "Mod fast." I smiled. "That is becoming a theme." He looked at me carefully. "I heard some things on the radio. About your company. News travels. In small towns, faster than parts, I guess." He laughed softly. "You all right?" I should have said yes. Instead, I said, "I think I did something I cannot undo." Caleb leaned against the fender. "Usually the things worth doing are like that." Rosie tugged my sleeve. "Did you beat the mean meeting people?" "Not exactly," I said. "I stopped one mean meeting person from making everything worse." "That counts," she said firmly. Then she ran back to her drawing where she had apparently illustrated a boardroom full of angry potatoes. One wore a tie. I suspected it was Graham. Caleb saw me looking and said, "She's been calling him Mr. Potato Boss." I laughed so hard I had to cover my mouth. It felt good, dangerously good. Caleb watched me with a kind of quiet pleasure that made my chest tighten. I paid the repair bill, and he charged me exactly the fair rate, not $1 extra, which somehow annoyed me again, but in a warmer, more familiar way. I offered to pay for the late nights. He said no. I offered to fund better equipment for the garage. He said absolutely not. I offered to fund better equipment for the garage. He said absolutely not. I said he was stubborn. He said I was confusing generosity with control. Rosie said both of us were being grumpy bolts. That ended the argument because neither of us had a defense against it. Before I left, Caleb asked if I'd eaten. I said I had coffee. He gave me a look. Rosie gave me a worse one. That was how I ended up at Nora's diner, not Maggie's. Because in Bellwether, the diner belonged to a woman named Nora Jean Pruitt who had silver hair, red glasses, and the energy of someone who knew everyone's sins, but still served them pie. She greeted Caleb with a kiss on the cheek and Rosie with a pancake shaped like a bear, then looked me up and down. "So you were the Boston lady who broke the car and shook up the radio." "I suppose so." She handed me a menu. "Good. You look like you need biscuits and consequences." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. I liked Nora Jean immediately and feared her slightly, which is usually a good combination. We sat in a booth by the window. Rosie explained school politics to me with intense seriousness, including a scandal involving stolen crayons and a boy named Tyler who apparently could not be trusted with glue. Caleb listened like every word mattered. I watched them, and something in me softened and ached at the same time. This was what I had never learned, how to belong to a table without performing. My phone buzzed halfway through breakfast. "Mara, The board wants an emergency session tomorrow, she said. Full vote on Graham's suspension in your 90-day proposal. Tomorrow, I repeated. Caleb looked up. Mara lowered her voice. Vivian, if this passes, Graham is finished. If it fails, they may push you into a leave of absence. There it was, the old world knocking again, polished shoes at the edge of a muddy little miracle. I looked at Rosie dipping fries into maple syrup, at Caleb pretending not to listen, at Nora Jean refilling coffee for an elderly man who called everyone Darlie. I had thought the boardroom was the battlefield. I was wrong. The battlefield was inside me, between the woman who always ran back when power whistled and the woman who had just learned that staying could also be brave. I told Mara, I will be there. Caleb's expression gave away nothing, but Rosie groaned. Mean meeting again. Afraid so. She pushed her pancake plate toward me. Take a bite first. It helps. So I did. A bite of bear-shaped pancake, too much syrup, not enough dignity. Then I looked at Caleb and said, I have to go back tonight. He nodded. I figured. I wanted him to ask me to stay. I wanted him not to. I wanted a lot of things I had no practice wanting. Outside the diner, the afternoon light had turned soft and gold across the wet street. Caleb walked me to my car. Rosie hugged my leg and whispered, Do not let Mr. Potato Boss win. I bent down. I will try. No, she said, with the fierce certainty only children and saints can afford. Do not try. Do. I looked at Caleb. She is terrifying. He smiled. I know. Before I got into the Mercedes, Caleb handed me a folded paper. What is this? Directions to the faster highway entrance, and, he hesitated, my number in case the car gives you trouble. Just the car. His eyes met mine. For now. That should have felt too forward. It did not. It felt like a door left unlocked, not open, not yet, but possible. I drove away from Bellwether with the repaired engine humming smoothly beneath me, and for the first time since I was a child, I cried without being angry at myself for it. By the time I reached Boston that night, the board packet had updated. Graham was fighting hard. His allies were claiming procedural misconduct. His lawyers were hinting at defamation. Some investors were demanding stability, which usually meant, give the loudest man whatever he wants so the graph calms down. I spent the night preparing like my old self, documents, projections, legal notes, voting maps, but something was different. I was no longer preparing to survive. I was preparing to tell the truth and let survival become someone else's obsession. The next morning, I entered the boardroom early. No rain this time. No damp coat. No trembling hands. Chairman Flop stayed in my bag, but I knew he was there, which was absurd and comforting. Graham arrived last, flanked by counsel, wearing a navy suit and a funeral smile. Vivian, he said, I hope you slept well. I did, I said. Pancakes helped. Confusion flickered across his face, and that tiny pleasure nearly made the whole morning worth it. Hollis called the meeting to order. The investigation findings were preliminary but damning. Payments traced. Communications recovered. Contract manipulation confirmed. Graham's lawyer objected, deflected, threatened. Graham performed wounded innocence for 17 minutes until Janice cut him off. Mr. Vale, she said, did you or did you not benefit personally from Southline selection? Graham leaned back. That question misunderstands modern advisory ecosystems. Janice looked at Hollis. I will take that as yes, wearing perfume. Even DeWitt smiled. The vote on Graham's suspension passed 9-2. His face went gray. Then came my proposal. 90-day review of the regional partnership model, immediate reinstatement of the Farm Protection Clause, public commitment to domestic supplier transparency, and the creation of a community investment pilot in 3 towns, Bellwether among them. Graham, though suspended, was allowed to speak once. He stood slowly, and this time his voice was quiet, which made it more dangerous. You are making a mistake that will follow this company for years. You are letting a sentimental episode distort fiduciary duty. You are choosing feelings over discipline. He looked around the room. Today it is farms and small towns. Tomorrow it will be every sob story with a zip code. And when the margins shrink, when shareholders turn, when competitors cut you apart, remember this moment. Remember that I warned you while Vivian Hart sold you a fairy tale? He sat down. The room waited for me. I stood, not with a speech in my hand, because I had written one and then thrown it away at 3 in the morning. Graham is right about one thing, I said. This decision will follow us for years. So will the opposite decision. Every choice does. If we cut people loose for a temporary gain, that follows us. If we keep our word when it is expensive, that follows us. If we keep our word when it is expensive, that follows us too. The question is not whether feelings belong in business. Feelings are already here. Fear is a feeling. Grief is a feel, but pride is a feeling. Graham just prefers the feelings that sound cold enough to pass as strategy. Hollis stared at me. Unreadable. I continued. I am not asking this board to approve charity. I am asking you to approve a stronger company, built on trust that cannot be purchased after we have destroyed it. I am asking you to approve a stronger company, built on trust that cannot be purchased after we have destroyed it. I am asking you to stop confusing cruelty with seriousness. And if that makes me too changed to lead the old way, then maybe the old way has got it in this exact. The vote took 4 minutes. 4 minutes can feel longer than a childhood if everyone in the room is deciding who you get to become. Hollis read the result. 8-3. Approved. For a second, I heard nothing. Then Mara exhaled behind me like she had been holding her breath since 2009. Graham stood, his chair scraping hard against the floor. This board will regret this, he said. No, Hollis replied, voice tired but firm. I regret not seeing you sooner. Graham looked at me once more. There was no smile now, only promise. This is not over, Vivian. I believed him. That was the problem with men like Graham. Losing a room did not end them. It only made them look for darker rooms. He left, and the door closed, and nobody cheered. But Janice reached across the table and slid the approved proposal toward me. Make it work, she said. I looked at the signatures, then at the city beyond the glass, and I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt the weight of every farmer, every worker, every town name in that packet settle onto my shoulders. Victory, I was learning, was not the moment the room agreed with you. It was the moment you became responsible for proving your heart was not just making noise. That evening, I stood alone in my office as the sun dropped behind the skyline. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Rosie standing beside my Mercedes in Caleb's garage, giving a thumbs up with one hand and holding Chairman Flop with the other. Under it, Caleb had written, "She says the car looks less sick now." I wrote back, "Tell her the mean meeting people behave better today." 3 dots appeared. Then, from Caleb, "And you? Did you behave better today?" I smiled down at the phone. "I think so." A minute later, he replied, "Good, keep going." I looked out over Boston, the city that had made me powerful and lonely, and for the first time I wondered what it would cost to build something powerful that did not require loneliness as the price of admission. I did not know the answer yet, but I knew this much. Graham Vale was not finished. The board had only given me 90 days. The company could still turn. The press could only given me 90 days. The company could still turn. The press could still twist the story. And somewhere in Bellwether, a man who had refused my money, my pressure, and my worst self was waiting beside a little girl who believed pancakes solved strategy. I had won the first fight, but the real test was coming, and it would not be in a boardroom. I used to think the real test of a person happened in the room where powerful people made decisions. But I was wrong, because the real test came 3 weeks later, in a town gym that smelled like floor wax, raincoats, old coffee, and the kind of fear people try to hide by folding their arms. Bellwether High had opened its gym for what my communications team insisted on calling a community listening session, which sounded harmless enough, almost gentle, like we were all going to sit in a circle and share concerns over cookies. But by the time I stepped through those double doors, I could feel the anger waiting for me in rows of metal folding chairs. Farmers in work jackets sat beside diner waitresses, retired mill workers, teachers, mechanics, mothers with toddlers half asleep on their laps, and in the back, leaning against the wall with Rosie tucked close to his side, was Caleb Mercer, the man who had fixed my car correctly, not quickly, and somehow had started fixing parts of me I had not admitted were broken. He did not wave. He just gave me one quiet nod, and that nod steadied me more than the entire legal team standing near the stage. Mara leaned toward me and whispered, "Remember, breathe before answering hostile questions." I whispered back, "That assumes I answer politely." She gave me a look. "Try it as an experiment." The reason everyone was angry was simple. Graham Vale had not disappeared after losing the boardroom fight. Men like Graham rarely disappear. They reinvent themselves as victims and find a microphone. 2 days after his suspension became public, an anonymous packet had been sent to local papers, regional blogs, and 3 board members claiming my Bellwether pilot was not a community investment plan at all, but a cover for a future land consolidation deal, one that would force independent farms into long-term dependence on Hartwell, raise taxes through infrastructure incentives, and turn Bellwether into what the packet called a corporate theme park for Vivian Hart's conscience. It was nasty because it was not entirely nonsense. The best lies always borrow shoes from the truth. Hartwell did need land access for a training facility, a distribution upgrade, and a small packaging plant conversion, and we were asking the town to trust a corporation that, until very recently, had been one board vote away from cutting people like them loose. Graham knew exactly where to press. He knew these folks had been promised things before. He knew grants came with strings, jobs came with closures later, and executives loved standing in front of humble brick buildings while cameras caught their good side. So by the time I arrived, half the town believed I had come to help, and the other half believed I had come to buy forgiveness wholesale. I could hardly blame them. Yesterday me would not have trusted me either. Nora Jean Pruitt from the diner stood near the coffee table with her red glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, watching me like she was deciding whether to feed me pie or throw it at me. Mayor Tom Braddock, a kind man with exhausted eyes and a tie that had given up around lunchtime, introduced me with a careful smile. "Folks, thank you for coming. Ms. Hart is here to answer questions about the proposed partnership." A man in the third row called out, "Partnership or takeover? Takeover." The room stirred. Mayor Braddock lifted a hand. "Let's keep it civil." Nora Jean muttered loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Civil is what people ask for when they know they brought bad news. I almost smiled, which would have been a terrible idea. I walked to the microphone. My notes were in my hand. 3 pages of clean phrases, projected benefits, job estimates, training numbers, transparency commitments, all the responsible language my team had worked on for days. I looked down at it, then looked at the faces in front of me, and I knew immediately the notes would fail. They sounded like the old Vivian, polished, careful, safe, and safe was exactly what no one in that gym trusted. So I folded the pages once and set them on the podium. "My name is Vivian Hart," I said, "and I understand why some of you do not trust me." That quieted the room a little, not because they forgave me, but because distrust liked being named. I continued, "I run a company that has benefited from towns like this for a long time, and if you are wondering why you should believe me now, after people in suits ignored you for years, that is a fair question." A woman near the aisle, maybe late 60s, with silver hair tucked under a rain hood, raised her hand without waiting to be called on. "My son worked at a plant in Mercer County," she said. "Corporate people came in with promises, same as you. Training, new equipment, future growth. 18 months later, they shut the place down and moved the jobs. So forgive me if your fair question does not pay anyone's mortgage." A few people clapped. I nodded. "What is your name, ma'am? Ruth Bell?" "Mrs. Bell, you are right. My words do not pay your mortgage. If all I brought tonight were words, do not pay your mortgage. If all I brought tonight were words, you should reject them." The clapping stopped. I opened the folder Mara had handed me before the meeting. "That is why any agreement we sign here will include a town review board with public minutes, local hiring requirements, penalties if we pull out early, supplier protections, and a right for the town to audit every commitment we make. Not trust me because I look sincere under gym lights. Hold me because the contract gives you teeth." Ruth Bell narrowed her eyes. "That sounds nice. They always sound nice." "Yes," I said. "So you should bring your own lawyer, not ours. I will pay for it, but you choose them." That got the first real murmur. The first crack in the wall, maybe. Then a younger man stood, arms tattooed, cap pulled low. "My brother says Hartwell tried to drop half the farms last month, and now you want applause for not doing it." "That is fair too," I said. "We almost did. I blocked it, but blocking harm is not the same as doing good. I know that. I am not asking for applause. I am asking for the chance to build something you can measure, challenge, and if I fail, publicly shame me for." Nora Jean called from the side, "Careful, honey. We are very good at that." This time people laughed, and I let myself smile. "Good," I said. "I may need supervision." The meeting went on for nearly an hour. Some questions were practical: wages, training, trucking routes, water use, property taxes. Some were personal. Where do you live? How long will you stay? What happens when Boston wants you back full time? That last one came from Caleb's father, Silas Mercer, a retired mechanic with a cane, a voice like gravel, and eyes that looked so much like Caleb's I knew immediately where that calm stubbornness had been born. He stood slowly in the back, near his son. "Miss Snow." "Hart," he said, "my boy speaks well of you," which surprised me because Caleb is stingy with praise and too generous with second chances. Caleb looked at the floor, and Rosie grinned like she had been handed candy. Silas continued, "But this town has seen important people pass through. They like us when we make them feel grounded, then they leave when we ask them to be accountable. So I am asking plain, are we a project to you, or are we people?" That question hit harder than any accusation because it was the one I had been afraid to ask myself. I looked at Caleb. He did not rescue me with an expression. He just waited. I took a breath. 3 months ago, I would have answered that badly, I said. I would have said people are always at the center of our mission, or some other phrase that sounds decent and means almost nothing. The room stayed quiet. I continued. The truth is, when my car broke down here, I was not looking for people. I was looking for a way out. I was arrogant, impatient, and more frightened than I wanted to admit. Your son refused to risk my safety for money, and your granddaughter gave me hot chocolate and a stuffed rabbit because she thought I looked sad. A small ripple of laughter moved through the room. Rosie lifted Chairman Flop proudly in the back. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. That night did not make me a saint. It made me embarrassed. It made me see myself. And once you see yourself clearly, you either change or you spend the rest of your life defending a lie. So no, Mr. Mercer, this town is not a project to me. It is the place where the lies stopped working. The gym went still in a way that made my hands tremble. Then the double doors opened. Cold air swept across the floor. Heads turned. Granville walked in. He was not in a suit this time, which somehow made him look more dangerous. Navy overcoat, open collar, reporter beside him. 2 men I recognized as private consultants trailing behind. He looked at the crowd, then at me, smiling as if the stage had been built for him all along. I apologize for the interruption, he said, though his voice made clear he apologized for nothing. But I believe the people of Bellwether deserve the full truth before they sign away their future to a woman trying to launder guilt into public affection. Mara whispered, "Oh, I hate him." I whispered back, "Get in line." Mayor Braddock stepped forward. "Mr. Vale, this is a town forum. You are not on the agenda." Graham spread his hands. Neither was honesty, apparently. This reporter's camera lifted. The whole room tightened. Graham turned toward the crowd with that smooth executive sorrow he wore like cologne. I worked with Vivian for years. She is brilliant, no one denies that. But she is also impulsive, image-driven, and right now politically desperate. Her company is under pressure. Her board is divided, and this so-called Bellwether plan is a convenient redemption story. A mechanic, a child, a town. How touching. How marketable. Caleb moved then, just slightly. One hand on Rosie's shoulder. I felt the old instinct rise in me, to fire back, to crush Graham with facts, to make him regret stepping into the room. But I had learned something from Caleb's garage. Some engines get worse when you race them. So I waited. Graham saw the silence as weakness and pressed harder. Ask her what happens if the board turns again. Ask her whether Hartwell has the cash to fund this without cuts elsewhere. Ask her if she will personally guarantee a single job. Ask her if she will still be here when the cameras leave. Bruce Bell stood again, looking at me. Well, there it was. The question Graham had meant to plant like a knife in the floor between us. I looked at Mara. She knew before I said it. Her eyes widened, not warning exactly, more like, "So we are doing the terrifying thing now." I turned back to the room. Graham is right to ask about guarantees. He blinked. That was not the line he expected. Graham is right to ask about guarantees. He blinked. That was not the line he expected. I said, "He is wrong about my motives, but the question is fair, so here is the guarantee. I am moving the pilot out from under discretionary board approval." The gym erupted in confused murmurs. Graham's face changed. He knew where I was going before most people did. "Vivian," he said sharply. I ignored him. "I've spent the last week negotiating with 2 board members and our legal counsel for the right to purchase Hartwell's underperforming Keystone division if the board loses confidence in the pilot or tries to reverse the protections we have promised. That division includes the Bellwether Corridor, the old packaging site, and the supplier relationships in this region. If they back out, I buy it at independent valuation with my own money and outside financing, and I run it as a separate company headquartered here." The room went silent, then loud all at once. Mara closed her eyes like a woman hearing a bridge explode behind her. Graham stepped toward the stage. "That is a fantasy." "No," I said, lifting the signed option agreement from my folder. "It is paperwork. And unlike your Southline arrangement, everyone is welcome to read it." The crowd shifted, not cheering, not yet. But something powerful moved through them. The sudden realization that the woman in front of them was not just promising to risk reputation, she was risking money, title, control, the holy trinity of my old life. Graham's voice sharpened. "You would damage Hartwell out of spite." I looked at him. "I would separate something worth saving from people who only know how to strip it." His eyes flashed. "You are throwing your career away for a town that would forget you in a month if the check stopped." Before I could answer, Rosie broke away from Caleb and marched down the aisle. Chairman Flop tucked under one arm. Purple coat button wrong, boots squeaking on the gym floor. Caleb started after her, but Silas caught his sleeve and murmured something I could not hear. Rosie stopped in front of Graham and looked up at him like he was a disappointing substitute teacher. "You are Mr. Start, Potato Boss," she said. The gym froze and then someone snorted. Graham stared down at her. "Excuse me." Rosie pointed at him. "You talk mean because you are scared. My daddy says people who have to make other people small are usually scared. They are small too." Caleb covered his face. Nora Jean whispered, "Lord, I love that child." Graham's mouth tightened. "Little girl, this is adult business." Rosie hugged the rabbit closer. "Then act like one." The gym lost it. Laughter, gasps, applause. The kind of sound no communications team could manufacture. Graham's face went scarlet. He looked at Caleb. "Control your daughter." Caleb finally stepped forward, voice calm but carrying across the room. "She is doing fine." Graham turned on him. "Of course you think so. This whole circus exists because Vivian spent one sentimental evening in your little garage and decided your simple life made a useful story. You should be embarrassed. You are not a simple life made a useful story. You are a mechanic with a failing business and a child you can barely support." The laughter died instantly. Caleb's face went still. Rosie moved closer to him. Something hot and ancient surged up in me, but before I could speak, Caleb did. He walked to the center aisle, wiping his hands on his jeans even though there was no grease on them. An old habit, maybe a way of keeping himself steady. "You are right about one thing," he said. "I am a mechanic. My business has hard months. I have bills stacked on my workbench and a roof that leaks over Bay 2. I am raising my daughter the best I can, and sometimes best still feels like not enough." He looked around the gym, not ashamed, not performing, just honest. "But I know the difference between being poor and being cheap. Poor is when the numbers are tight. Cheap is when a man sells out people he never bothered to know and calls it strategy." The room went quiet again, a better quiet. Caleb turned to Graham. "You can insult me. I've been underestimated by better men than you, and worse ones too. But do not stand in this town and tell these people they are props in someone else's story. They are the story. You just never learned how to read anything without a $sign in front of it." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then, Silas Mercer tapped his cane once on the floor. Nora Jean started clapping. Ruth Bell joined. Then the room rose. Not all at once, but in waves. A sound building from hands, boots, folding chairs, voices, not polished, not polite, but real. Graham stood in the center of it, exposed in a way documents had never quite managed. He could survive accusations. He could spin conflicts, but he could sinflife conflicts, but he could not survive a room that had stopped fearing his language. The reporter lowered her camera and looked at him like even she knew the headline had changed. Graham leaned close to me as he passed the stage. "This town will not save you." I looked at Caleb, at Rosie, at the people standing together under fluorescent gym lights. "Maybe not," I said. "Maybe they already did." Graham left before the meeting ended. By the time the doors closed behind him, the air felt different, as if the whole town had exhaled. The vote was not official that night, because towns do things properly when trust has been abused. But something had shifted. A committee formed. Ruth Bell volunteered, loudly, to make sure I did not get away with corporate nonsense. Nora Jean offered the diner for weekly meetings and said if anyone argued too long, she would weaponize meatloaf. Silas agreed to review facility repair needs. Mayor Braddock looked 10 years younger by the time he found his pen. And Caleb, after Rosie had fallen asleep across 2 folding chairs with Chairman Flop under her cheek, came to stand beside me near the empty bleachers. "You meant that," he said. "About buying the division." I nodded. "I did. That is a lot to risk." I looked at him. "You risked the 5 times repair bill to do the right thing." He smiled faintly. "Not exactly the same scale." "No," I said, "but maybe the same muscle." He looked down, then back at me. "Be careful, Vivian. Wanting to become better does not mean people will stop trying to use that against you." "I know. Do you?" His voice was not accusing, just worried. I thought about Graham, the board, the press, the investors who would call me visionary if it worked, and reckless if it did not. I thought about my parents, gone now, both of them, leaving behind money, lessons, and a loneliness I had mistaken for discipline. I thought about the little girl sleeping across the chairs who had defended a room full of adults with the moral clarity of a thunderbolt in Velcro shoes. I said, "I am learning." Caleb nodded slowly. That answered enough. Outside, Bellwether was wrapped in cold night and wet pavement, and Caleb walked me to my car like he had the first night, only this time no one pretended it was just manners. At the curb, Rosie woke enough to mumble from his arms, "Miss Vivian, are you staying now?" Caleb stiffened slightly. I looked at him, then at her. Not tonight, sweetheart, but I am coming back. Promise. Her eyes opened halfway. Grown-ups say promise when they mean maybe. That one hurt. I stepped closer and brushed a curl from her forehead. Then I will not say promise. I will say this. I am putting my work here, my money here, and a piece of my heart here, and I do not do that lightly. Rosie considered this with sleepy seriousness. Okay, that sounds like a big promise. Caleb laughed softly. She gets the last word from my side of the family. I got into the Mercedes, and this time, when I drove away, Bellwether did not feel like a place I was leaving. It felt like a place I had been trusted to return to. The next 90 days were ugly, beautiful, exhausting, and so full of small humiliations that Nora Jean started keeping a list behind the diner counter titled Things Vivian Did Not Know About Real Life. Number 1. You cannot wear white pants to a muddy farm visit and expect sympathy. Number 2. If a man named Earl says the fence is probably fine, do not lean on it. Number 3. Never ask a room of farmers if anyone has just a quick comment. There is no such thing. I spent half my time in Boston fighting investors and half in Bellwether listening, learning, getting corrected by people who could smell empty promises from across a parking lot. Caleb fixed equipment at the old packaging site before we had even signed the final agreement, then refused payment until I threatened to let Nora Jean invoice him in pie. Rosie began leaving crayon drawings in my briefcase, most of them featuring me, Caleb, herself, Chairman Flop, and Graham as an angry potato being chased by a tractor. Mara visited once and said Bellwether was either saving me or ruining my ability to enjoy normal hotels. I told her both could be true. The board watched the numbers like hawks. The press circled. Graham gave interviews about emotional capitalism, which was a phrase so annoying that Nora Jean banned his name from the diner before breakfast. But the pilot began to work. Not magically. Not overnight. Real things never do. The old packaging site reopened one line, then two. A training program started in the high school shop wing. 3 farms that had considered shutting down signed fair contracts with price stability built in. Hartwell's consumer trust numbers rose in the region. Turnover fell. Reporters came expecting a soft little redemption piece and found welders, drivers, farmers, accountants, teachers, and one diner owner who told a national business magazine that the problem with rich people is they think community is a garnish. The quote went everywhere. Nora Jean pretended to hate the attention and framed the article above the pie case. By the end of the 90 days, the board had a choice: keep the Bellwether model inside Hartwell, expand it slowly, and accept that I would not return to being the kind of CEO who made everyone comfortable, or let me exercise the purchase option and walk away with the Keystone division. The final meeting happened in Boston, but this time I did not enter alone. Not literally, the board would never have allowed that many people in the room. But I carried Bellwether with me in a folder full of signed statements, job numbers, supplier contracts, photographs, school enrollment projections, tax impact studies, and one small drawing from Rosie where I appeared to be wearing a crown made of pancakes. Graham was not there. His investigation had become a legal matter by then, and his career, while not destroyed, had finally become less shiny. Still, I felt him in the room, or maybe I felt the old world he represented, the one that whispers, be practical, be hard, be impressive, be lonely if you must, just do not be soft enough to belong anywhere. Hollis opened the meeting. Vivian, he said, you have forced this board to reconsider assumptions we have held for a long time. I waited. That could go either way. DeWitt adjusted his papers. The numbers are stronger than expected. Not perfect, but strong. Community trust is not a line item we can ignore anymore, apparently. Hollis looked at me. The board has voted to retain and expand the regional partnership model, with oversight, phased investment, and your continued leadership. Mara, seated behind me, made a sound that was either relief or an allergic reaction to suspense. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt a strange calm. Thank you, I said. There is one more thing. Everyone looked tired immediately. Fair. I had become the kind of woman who made one more thing dangerous. I took a breath. I will stay as CEO through the expansion period, but I am relocating Hartwell's regional headquarters to Bellwether for this pilot, and I will spend the majority of the year there. If this model is going to be real, it cannot be managed like a charity from a tower. It has to be lived with. Hollis studied me, and Boston will survive being looked at from a distance. DeWitt shook his head, but he was smiling. You really have changed. I thought of Caleb saying a company can be rebuilt. A life has to be faced. Yes, I said. Finally. When I returned to Bellwether that evening, there was no formal welcome planned. At least that was what Caleb told me. It was lying terribly. The whole town had strung lights across Main Street, not fancy lights, not professionally installed, just warm bulbs looped from the diner to the hardware store to the old maple near the square. Someone had painted a banner that said, "Welcome back, Vivian," and under it, in Rosie's unmistakable handwriting, "Mr. Potato Boss lost." I laughed until I cried, and then I cried for real because people were hugging me, not networking, not positioning, not flattering, just pulling me into the noisy, imperfect warmth of being wanted somewhere. Ruth Bell handed me a casserole and said, "Do not let this go to your head. We are still auditing you." I told her I would expect nothing less. Nora Jean gave me pie and consequences. Silas shook my hand and said, "You came back." 3 words. That was all. But they felt like a medal I had not earned yet and would spend years trying to deserve. Caleb stood a little apart from the crowd with Rosie on his hip. When I reached them, Rosie launched herself at me, nearly taking us both down. "You came back for real." She pulled away and inspected my face. "Are you the boss of here now?" "No," I said. "Nobody is the boss of here. Not even Nora Jean." From across the square, Nora Jean shouted, "That is legally disputed." Caleb smiled, and there was something in his eyes I had been avoiding because it frightened me more than Graham ever had. Pride, affection, maybe love, though love still felt like a word too large to say without both hands. We walked away from the crowd for a minute, just to the edge of the square where the lights blurred softly in the chilly air. "You did it," he said. "We did something," I corrected. "It has to keep being done." He nodded. "That sounds more like real life." I looked at him. "Caleb, I need to tell you something before this town starts planning things neither of us agreed to." He laughed. "Too late. Nora Jean already asked what flowers you like." My face warmed. "I am serious." "So am I." "She is terrifying." We stood there, smiling like fools until the quiet got tender. I said, "I do not know how to do this. Be part of a place. Be cared about. Care back without trying to control the outcome." He looked at me the way he had looked at my broken engine. Not judging the damage, only trying to understand what needed patience. "Then we do it properly," he said. "Not fast." I laughed softly. "That really is your whole philosophy. Works on engines, might work on people." Rosie ran up then, breathless. "Daddy, Miss Vivian, Nora says if you are going to stare at each other, you should at least do it near the pie table, because people are blocking the cider." Caleb closed his eyes. "I need to send her to etiquette school." I said, "Please do not. She is the only honest consultant I trust." Months passed. Winter came down heavy on Bellwether, and I learned that snow in a small town is not scenic after the 3rd driveway. I learned to keep boots in my car, to drink diner coffee without asking what roast it was, to listen before solving, and to accept that sometimes the best business meeting happens beside a loading dock with a man named Earl, explaining why your plan makes no sense because you forgot the truck has to turn around. Artwell changed, slowly, painfully, but visibly. So did I. My Boston apartment went from home to storage. My office clothes got less perfect. My laugh got easier. I still made mistakes. Plenty. I overpromised once, and Ruth Bell nearly took my head off in a public meeting. I tried to buy the garage a new lift anonymously, and Caleb returned the check with a note that said, "Nice try." I cried in my car after a 12-hour day because belonging did not make life easy. It made it matter, which was much more dangerous. And through all of it, Caleb was there, never pushing, never performing, never letting me turn him into a symbol instead of a man. He had bad days. He worried about money. He got quiet around the anniversary of his wife leaving. He loved Rosie with a devotion so steady it sometimes broke my heart to watch. And Rosie? Well, Rosie simply decided I was hers and waited for the adults to catch up. She saved me a seat at school plays. She drew me into family pictures. She once asked, very loudly in the grocery store, if I was going to marry Daddy or just keep making nervous eyes at him, which caused Mrs. Alvarez to drop an entire bag of oranges. The proposal did not happen under chandeliers or in front of cameras. That would have been wrong for us. It happened the following October, 1 year after my Mercedes died on Route 19, when Caleb asked me to take a drive with him after dinner. We ended up by the old covered bridge outside town, where the creek moved black and silver under the moon, and the trees had turned the same deep gold I remembered from that first terrible beautiful night. Rosie was supposed to be at Nora Jean's, which should have told me something because no child voluntarily does homework at a diner unless a conspiracy is underway. Caleb parked, then led me to the bridge, where someone had strung simple white lights along the beams. Not perfect. A little crooked. One strand blinked like it had stage fright. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I turned to him, already crying because apparently my body had learned honesty before my mouth did. Caleb took my hands. Vivian, he said, I have been trying to think of something wise to say, but every version sounded like a man in a movie, and you know I cannot afford that kind of embarrassment. I laughed to tears. Thank God. He smiled, then grew serious. Thank God. He smiled, then grew serious. When you first came into my garage, I thought you were the most impossible woman I had ever met. You were rude, freezing, bossy, and dressed like you were about to fire the rain. Accurate, I whispered. But you listened when it mattered, he said. Not right away, but eventually. And I watched you choose the harder thing again and again, not because it made you look good, but because you could not go back to pretending you did not know better. He reached into his coat pocket and my heart began pounding so hard I could hear it. Rosie and I had a life before you, a good one, a small one maybe, but full of love. Then you came in like a storm and somehow, after knocking half the furniture around, you made the house bigger. You opened a small wooden box. The ring inside was not enormous. It was delicate, warm gold, with a tiny stone that caught the crooked lights just enough. Vivian Hart, will you marry me? Not because you once made a joke in the rain, not because I fixed your car, but because somewhere along the way, we started fixing a life together. I could not speak. Behind a tree, Rosie yelled, say yes. Nora Jean hissed, child, hush. Then half the town shushed both of them terribly. I laughed and cried at the same time, which is not elegant, but neither is real happiness when it finally finds you. I looked at Caleb, then toward the shadows where Rosie was clearly vibrating with hope, and I said, yes, Caleb, I will marry you. Rosie burst out before anyone could stop her and slammed into us like tiny cannon. Finally, she said, like we had inconvenienced her personally. I have been waiting forever. The town came out from hiding then because apparently every person in Bellwether had known except me, and under those crooked bridge lights, beside the man who had taught me patience and the little girl who had taught me tenderness, I understood something I wish I had known when I was younger. Life does not always change when you get what you chased. Sometimes it changes when the thing you chase breaks down, and you are forced to walk in the rain toward a little light you would have ignored on any easier night. We married the next spring in the church on Maple Street, with Rosie scattering flower petals in a very serious manner, and Chairman Flop sitting in the front row wearing a bow tie Nora Jean claimed was tasteful. Mara cried harder than anyone and denied it with corporate confidence. Ruth Bell audited the seating chart. Silas walked Caleb to the front and whispered something that made both men blink too much. And when I reached the aisle, I did not feel like a CEO or a reformed villain or a woman proving a point to anyone. I felt like Vivian, just Vivian, loved, known, still imperfect, still learning, but no longer alone. During the reception in the town square, someone asked me if I regretted the night my car broke down. I looked across the lights at Caleb dancing with Rosie, both of them laughing, and I thought about the woman I had been on Route 19, soaked, furious, certain that money could open every door worth entering. No, I said, I do not regret it. Sometimes the worst delay of your life is just mercy arriving badly dressed. Years later, people would tell the story in different ways. Some called it a business turnaround. Some called it a business turnaround. Some called it a love story. Nora Jean called it proof that hot chocolate is legally binding. Graham, I heard, eventually found work advising companies that liked his kind of cold math, and maybe that is its own punishment, to spend your life winning rooms where no one would bring you soup if you were sick. As for Bellwether, it did not become perfect. No place does. There were fights, budget meetings, bad winters, late shipments, layoffs we barely avoided, and one disastrous company picnic involving 3 goats and a collapsed dessert table. But it became stronger because people had a say in what happened to them, and because we learned slowly and stubbornly that profit and decency do not have to be enemies unless cowards make them that way. And me, I still think about that first night often. The rain, the steam, the garage light, Caleb's calm voice telling me no, Rosie's little hand offering me a mug of cocoa like it was the simplest thing in the world to care for a stranger. I had spent my whole life trying to become untouchable, only to discover that being untouchable is just another word for being lonely. The miracle was not that Caleb fixed my engine. The miracle was that he refused to let me drive away broken. So now I want to ask you, who was really right in this story? Was Vivian wrong to risk a company for a town most executives would have written off, or was that the first truly responsible decision she ever made? Was Caleb stubborn for refusing money when someone powerful demanded speed, or was he the only person honest enough to protect her from herself? And what about Graham? Was he just a ruthless businessman doing what the market rewards? Or was he proof that success without conscience eventually turns a person hollow? Tell me what you think in the comments, because stories like this are not just about love or business. They're about the choices we make when money, pride, and human dignity collide. If this story made you feel something, share it with someone who still believes kindness is weakness. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next story. Because sometimes justice does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it rolls in on a broken engine, in the middle of the rain, and changes everything.